Hi, everybody. I'm Diane Brady. I'm here with Dr. Bandy Lee, who is a forensic psychiatrist specializing in violence. And you're also the editor of The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. That was written a few years ago, Dr. Lee. And first of all, welcome.
Thank you.
What are you seeing now?
Well, I see that everything that we were concerned about, it's now 6 years ago that we published the book, myself and 26 other mental health professionals at the time, that everything that we had warned against, unfortunately, has come true. And one of the aspects that we were most concerned about was that over time his dangers would grow in terms of not just in terms of a more dangerous case of Donald Trump, but also in terms of what we've been saying, Trump contagion, which is kind of like a psychological epidemic. I can explain more later, but we don't think of psychological symptoms as being infectious or contagious. But
one of the concerns at the time the book came out was this idea of diagnosing a public figure or any figure that you haven't personally treated. How do you deal with that?
Actually, thank you for giving me the opportunity to clarify that we were not diagnosing. That's the furthest thing from what we were trying to do. What we were doing was actually warning against his psychological dangers and his potential unfitness for his job. And in fact, anyone who is dangerous and places other people in danger is automatically unfit for just about any job in the United States, except for elected office. And so it was important for us to warn the public as a public health responsibility that we have as mental health and medical professionals.
So it's not diagnosing in what I'm still trying to draw the line here. Is it's not diagnosing because you're talking about the ecosystem he's created, or how would you draw the distinction?
It's different in that diagnosis is usually for a private patient. For whom you will be providing individual treatment. And that usually comes with a personal examination, and the information that you obtain is kept confidential. But in the case of a public figure who is posing a danger to others or the public, then it becomes a public health issue where the patient is not really the public figure, but the public itself. And it says in our ethics guidelines that we have a responsibility not just to individual patients, but to society as well.
Is this the Goldwater, is it called the Goldwater rule? Well, what is that about? Because I know that was something else that people have raised, and I think it's good to just address some of the challenges that you've obviously encountered and spoken about a lot in the last few years.
Well, obviously, when there is danger such as this and a great undermining of our democratic institutions and traditions, then voices that are relevant to the times and could educate the public and empower the public are often the first to be silenced. And so it was a sign of great dangers to come, not just because of this one individual, but to our society and our democratic institutions.
Do you look around at let's say the current field of candidates? We have a number of people who've come forward for the GOP nomination. People are looking at Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, various others. Joe Biden, I know that people have a lot of questions. It's become very politicized as to his fitness for office. How do you look at that situation? Do you have any sort of comparable assessments?
So to clarify, I usually certainly don't diagnose, and I don't normally comment on political figures, except when they pose a great danger to the nation and there is enough information to be able to offer opinions that would add to what the public already sees. And certainly I would say that more generally, that this Trump contagion that we were warning against since the very beginning, because a mentally impaired person had the powerful influence of the U.S. presidency for the full, not only for the full term, but in fact in my book, Profile of a Nation, Trump's Mind, America's Soul, I
Mm-hmm.
described that his presidency essentially never ended because there was no intervention that was commensurate to the problem at hand. And so that's very much what has continued in the mind of many of his supporters.
So you don't see any, just to clarify, you don't see any comparable threats with the other candidates or other people in the public sphere right now that would warrant the same attention that Donald Trump warrants. So that would just so people watching understand, if they did pose a similar threat, you would have a similar warning about other people like a Ron DeSantis or a Joe Biden.
If the warning warranted an individual, which is not diagnosing but warning against the dangers of the individual in that position, currently I would say that the danger is greater than ever. And even the dangers of Donald Trump are greater than ever because he could still win. He could still win the candidacy and could still win the presidency, not because of any legitimate reasons, but in spite of everything that has happened and in spite of all the indictments. His ratings have been rising since the indictments. His fundraising has been going up. So this is the kind of thing that I've been trying to point out, is a kind of psychological epidemic, if you will, in that his powers have grown despite people's unwillingness to support him. His influence has grown, and he has had many imitators as a result. And this is not just rational strategy, but truly the spread of symptoms and the spread of the dysfunction that he has brought to the political scene.
I want to be, I always try to tread carefully because, we're not partisan, and,
Yes.
We have many people who are to the right, to the left. How do you respond to the criticism, Dr. Lee, that this feels like a partisan attack? That, you don't like Donald Trump, you wouldn't vote for him, so you're pathologizing him and his presidency.
That's why it's very important to speak about mental health aspects in general terms. It's important for the public to be educated, especially when it's become such a critical issue in the political field.
So, but when you unpack the hallmarks of what we're talking about with regard to the dangers here, what are some of the classic signs that you've identified that distinguish this? And is there a history? Like, can you look at other parts of the world or
Yes.
times in history where you'd say this is a classic scenario A?
Yes, absolutely. This has happened in many other cultures, and advanced societies have not been immune.
Mm-hmm.
Just as individuals can fall into an illness, and once the illness takes course, it can sometimes only worsen unless there's proper intervention. And that's very much what we're seeing with society. A well-known example is German society, where many people are still alive and remember what happened there. It had one of the most advanced cultures, its literature, music, economy, and its military force with the Bismarck. It was one of the most powerful nations, and yet it too had succumbed to a kind of, you might call it Hitler contagion or Nazi contagion, in that mental symptoms are often thought to be confined to the individual, but they are in fact psychosocial. And they can spread, in fact, spread more rapidly than the ordinary infectious diseases we think about. And this is an important characteristic.
What would you, is there any
of.
contemporary examples? Because we talk a lot about strongman politics, can't think of any women at the moment, but I'm sure there could be strong women politics too. But are you seeing examples in the current, well, obviously we've got Putin in Russia, Xi Jinping, I don't want to pick on those two, but they come to mind. Would that be comparable, or do you see that as a different category?
Saudi Arabia, Israel,
with Netanyahu?
Hungary, yes. All these examples, all of the above. So what's unusual is not so much what happens, not so much the kind of person who instigates this, but because persons with these mental impairments are actually commonly found. As a forensic psychiatrist, I've probably treated hundreds of them, and in fact, treated close to 1,000 individuals whom I could point out how Donald Trump resembles. But what is unusual is the power that they are granted and their inability to handle that power. So in fact, elected offices are the only offices that do not require mental competence. But every other job, every other task requires it, and we would do well, in fact, if we did require it of our elected
What
officials.
specific impairments are you looking at that are the biggest red flags for you? Because you said it feels like it's a more dangerous situation now.
Yes, because of behaviors and characteristics that have not been contained.
Can you speak specifically about what you're talking about?
The violence proneness, the aggressive rhetoric, the dismantling of governmental institutions or media institutions that get in the way of these individuals' goals. They hunger for power, but they don't know how to handle the power, so they abuse it, and the more it becomes apparent as a result of the power that they hold that they are not capable of handling the power, the more it will become severe, and the more they will cling to power. So, in fact, because they cannot govern themselves or set limits on themselves on their own, it is incumbent on the healthy segment of society or the outside public to place restrictions and limits.
Would every dictator or wannabe dictator fall into this category that you're talking about?
Many of them do. There's only a certain collection of disorders that do get out of hand in this manner.
Why does it feel more dangerous now? I mean, we've had a number of hearings. You know, you're talking about somebody who's facing, multiple days in court potentially. Why would it feel worse?
It could go either way. This could be an opportunity to contain the person. There have been numerous opportunities along the way, probably even better ones, while he was president and shortly after.
The 25th Amendment, or what type of opportunities?
Yes, in the very beginning. In fact, we were invited to speak with Congress members. The 25th Amendment was seriously thought about, and the drafter of the 25th Amendment actually said that data and medical data should guide the implementation. But as I said, there have been other rhetorics that have been advanced, disinformation, in fact, I would say, that we were diagnosing, that we were using psychiatry as a political tool, not pointing out medical facts, when in fact that's what we were doing.
It must have been, before I go into the impact yourself, talk about why it's more dangerous now, because we feel it's been normalized, or what is the danger now?
Norms have been broken. It has become absolutely normal and regular to lie. As a politician, it has become normal to advance non-facts or disinformation, or to entirely change the narrative that has no connection to reality. And that's a very dangerous situation, because you can create a parallel reality.
And no one individual is to blame for that. Obviously, we can look at the social media platforms. We can look at, cybercrime, in terms of the disinformation campaigns. Let me switch to asking about you personally, because I feel, when you stand up and you speak out about these things, the consequences, both, in terms of your job, in terms of, the public reaction, how has it been for you, just the blowback? Because you've faced a lot of anger, and I can't imagine how you deal with that as a professional.
Well, I actually have dealt with violent individuals all my career. I've worked in prison settings and taught law students who represent asylum seekers from dangerous regimes. I've done that at Yale Law School for 17 years. And so this kind of reaction is not unusual. In fact, it's rather, we still have more, far more privilege and rights than any other environment. That being said, it was the blowback itself that indicated to me the level of danger we were in, because the relevant voices who will speak the truth, who will educate the public with the best available knowledge, intellectuals, journalists, these would be the individuals who would primarily be targeted in dangerous times like this. And all the more it's important to speak up.
Do you feel that the reception now is different than when you first came out with these, the book, for example, before or as Donald Trump was going into office?
Well, public reception has always been very strong, even when we were suppressed from the media. The public has always come back to us. We have an organization, the World Mental Health Coalition, and we get messages all the time. Where are the psychiatrists? Where are the psychologists? And but now, after many years of exclusion from public discourse, and there's kind of a very odd stigma that didn't exist in the beginning. In the very beginning, I was actually impressed that despite mental health issues being difficult to talk about, the media seemed directly to come to the pertinent experts for the pertinent topic. But mental health professionals became the only professionals not allowed to speak about their area of expertise as far as this is concerned, and that really has had a detrimental effect to society. Because in my view, it's still the most relevant discussion to have.
So what would be your message now to sum up? I mean, obviously you've talked about, that we're in more danger, and the reality is the voters will decide, right? And
yes,
that's in many ways, we've decided that's the way it should be.
Yes,
the courts,
good.
the voters, we can add our voices. What about for you in terms of how you're spending your time? You've become a public figure. You have your sort of private clientele. Do you have a different sense of mission now, having gone through this experience and continuing to watch what's happening in the political sphere?
Well, nothing really has gone differently than my expectation. In fact, my greatest fears were confirmed. And at a time like this, it has occurred to me that staying within the academic position or the clinical position, even as consultant to various states or nation states, as I had done in the past in terms of prison reform or violence prevention, is not really enough. So I've actually been invited to co-found a violence prevention institute. And so my colleagues and world-renowned colleagues in this area are getting together, and we're forming a think tank to try to decide what would be best to do at times like this.
Do you have any advice to finish up as to what brings us together? We've become such a polarized country, and to criticize either side really sort of gives you a one-dimensional label at that time as to where you stand politically. I'm talking about myself as a journalist here. What advice do you have as to how we come together, or what the consequences could be if we don't?
First of all, I would say that as a medical person who was never politically involved in the past, that medicine and science and facts are actually a great place to come together. And health versus disease is a wonderful paradigm, because we would all like to be drawn toward health.
Healthy society, healthy people.
Healthy society, healthy people. And if we help improve conditions to elevate levels of health, then everyone would benefit. Fragmentation itself is a sign of disease. And so I'm continuing to work from the perspective of medicine and psychiatry and violence prevention, which is a public health concern. And that's where working toward truth and repair and all are thriving is a great place to get together.
Well, thank you for joining us to talk about the situation that we are in now, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.